What is going on, guys? Jason Burke here, Styles Clash for Life, coming at you on YouTube, and today I've got another edition of The Drive-In, where I watch recently released films and tell you guys whether they're worth watching, worth waiting for, or worth skipping altogether. Today I'm bringing you guys my most anticipated horror film of 2024, the one I was looking forward to the most as soon as I saw a tiny little snippet and heard rumors about the sequel coming from X and Pearl. I'm talking about Ty West's MaXXXine. I've been a big fan of this franchise so far. It's my favorite modern, 2020s horror franchise so far. You had the kind of classic slasher first movie, X from Ty West. Then you had the X prequel, Pearl, which shows off the titular character Pearl. And now we have the sequel to X and the third installment of the franchise, MaXXXine, following Maxine Minx from the previous events of X. So this is a spoiler-free review. Going to bring you guys this spoiler-free. It just came out Friday. I just saw it today, Monday, as I'm posting this. So going to try and talk around plot points and give you guys some spoiler-free goodness here today. I'll talk about a bunch of pros and cons and the things I liked and things I didn't like, because there are a lot of things to discuss, and I'll get to them quickly. This movie, as the first one was, is written and directed and produced and edited by Ty West. You guys know Ty West, The Innkeepers, the X and Pearl movies, The Sacrament, House of the Devil. You guys know Ty West. The guy is a really talented, cerebral kind of indie horror creator. Big fan of his. This film stars Mia Goth as Maxine Minx, Giancarlo Esposito, Kevin Bacon, Elizabeth Debicki, Halsey. It is a pretty big star-studded cast in this movie. It's essentially a one main character movie. Maxine Minx, Mia Goth is the main character. Also, I think helped to produce and write parts of the draft of this film, I believe. So very excited to see how she would progress her character. Again, essentially, this is the story of the Maxine Minx character coming out of the slaughter, murder, survival situation in the X movie and coming into her own now in Hollywood, trying to catch her big break outside of the porn industry, getting into acting in general, and she finds a role in a horror film. So starting off with the pros. Number one, I wrote down bigger sequel. This feels like a much bigger movie than the indie grassroots films that we got from the previous movies. I am referring to this as Ty West's Scream 3. This very much feels like Scream 3 to me in a lot of ways. You have the big star-studded cast, you've got everything kind of set in Hollywood, being around the meta situation of making movies, things are happening on a horror movie set around horror movie-based characters. It very much feels like they've taken kind of the bigger action Hollywood approach with bigger sets, bigger locations, bigger kills when necessary. Everything feels like it's coming to a head. You feel this kind of meaning to be the last chapter in the original trilogy, and this feels very much like the Scream 3 of this franchise. Also, as I ran down in the opening credits, I love the casting in this movie. There are a lot of characters that have really distinctive characteristics, and they're cast very well. Obviously, Mia Goth is a star. She's been a budding star for several years now in the horror and action industries. She's great in this, obviously. She plays her character perfectly. But Kevin Bacon has a really good kind of a seedy, almost kind of a hitman type of character. I won't spoil anything. Giancarlo Esposito is well cast in his role as well. He always has a bit of a hardened character, but also some kind of heart to him, some relationships close to him, if that makes any sense. He does a nice job in this. All of the different actors, like Lily Collins and Halsey, they're all cast really well. This whole thing is just a really well-cast ensemble of big names making fun cameos and then getting to do some pretty outlandish things, even in brief scenes. None of these characters can get a ton of focus, but they all get little moments to stand out. So you've got an ensemble of people all kind of picking their spots and picking their moments and being well-characterized in the script to be able to do a little more with their name value and make the characters feel a little bigger without being too cheesy. My next major positive is Maxine's toughness. They do a lot of references to her psyche. I like when we go into a sequel where one of the main characters returns and you see how the events of the previous film have damaged or affected the main character. You want to follow along with their journey. You've seen them now go through something severe and survive it. Now you want to see, for better and for worse, how it has changed them. And so that was really important to kind of make references back to X and even to Pearl if you could at times, and kind of see where MaXXXine is now for better and for worse. And you get both of those things in MaXXXine's toughness. You see her psyche, you get some flashback moments to some of the trauma she lived with in the X movie. You see some of the things she had to survive. You see kind of how some of the stuff still haunts her and how her past is still catching up with her and how she still feels kind of, she's sad, she's scared, she still has moments of freaking out, but also she is hardened now. She's tough. There's a moment where she confronts somebody in a one-on-one situation and she takes control of the situation. There's a couple other lines and delivery things that she delivers that you're like, "Fool, MaXXXine is ready for war if need be." You don't want to mess with MaXXXine. She's still damaged from the previous events. She hasn't gotten entirely over them yet. She's still battling through trauma that negatively affects her, but she is also tough and ready to go. She is a quintessential final girl, and I love the way she's characterized as this being a sequel, taking all the previous events and pouring them into the current character. I like that a lot. Also, the gore. The gore, while the kills and the kill scenes are infrequent in this movie, they're not used a whole ton. When they are, they make a difference. They matter. The gore stands out in this movie. Ty West, I think, has a bit of a past with gore, at least works with a lot of good makeup artists. And so, while there's not as much gore as in the previous films, and sometimes not as much as you would expect, the moments when things have to happen, they happen and they linger on them. You see a couple of things, even for brief glimpses, you get a couple of shots of, wow, that's pretty extreme. So the gore gets ratcheted up. While there's less gore and less overall kills and bodies and things like that for your traditional horror films, when they get the gore in this movie, they linger on it and they show you we're not messing around. Pretty good gore there. I like all of the meta commentary as well. There's a lot of commentary about Hollywood and kind of what it takes to be a star, kind of how to show up on set, the temperamental people around you, how to deal with directors, people's attitudes, kind of the cost of fame, right? Because the whole thing with MaXXXine is, I'm going to be a star. And they go back to that theme over and over again. What would you do? How much would you sacrifice to be a star? And who do you got to put up with? And what do you have to deal with? And it's a pretty good theme in this movie. There's also references heavily to Bates Motel. They talked about Psycho in this movie. They shot a couple of shots at the Bates Motel lot, which I think is in Hollywood, right? They also referenced in Psycho 2 had just happened a few years prior. I think this movie takes place in 1985, 4 or 5, something like that. So they referenced Psycho 2 having just been shot there. As a movie, they even use the Psycho window. That's in the trailer. I'm not spoiling anything, but in the trailer, you see her looking up into Norman Bates' mother's window she would look out of. They use that shot pretty frequently. So really good meta lessons in this about Hollywood. They use the physicality of the location of Hollywood a lot, and they also use the lessons about the good and bad of what it takes to be a big star in LA, the Hollywood Hills, right? So here are some negatives for me. Number one, the tone of the movie. I didn't really know how to even quantify this because it doesn't really feel like a horror movie. And it also just doesn't feel like part of the trilogy in a lot of ways, right? So the first two movies, X and Pearl, the movie and then the prequel to the movie, both take place on this big isolated farm, right? There's just acreage of farmland and animals and crocodile moats and, a horse stable and all kind of stuff like that. So you get this isolated country, peaceful feel. And both movies devolve into slashers in that peaceful, isolated environment. So you get a certain feel texturally, visually on screen, the genre, the pacing, you get a certain feel for those things that match up very well in X and Pearl. Those things aren't really here in this movie. This movie is taken out of that isolated environment. It's taken away from being a slasher. It's taken away from maniacal characters and people trying to either murder or survive murder, for the most part. You're taking a lot of those things out of this movie, and the only really retaining thing from the last two films you get is Maxine Minx, Mia Goth. Other than Maxine, this just kind of feels like a Hollywood action movie, like an action thriller, with some like sprinkles of callbacks to X and Mia Goth sprinkled in. To me, this was hard to really feel like a horror movie because it feels more like I said before, Scream 3, kind of going bigger, going Hollywood, going more meta. But Scream 3 at least still had those traditional slasher and murders and kind of still felt like a Scream movie, just bigger because it was building to the climax. This movie, while the sequel felt a lot bigger in terms of budget and location and kind of shots, drone shots and longer shots and things like that, it didn't feel like a horror movie. It felt like you took a character from those movies and made it an action Hollywood movie that has moments of thriller and horror mixed in. So the tone was a little off for me. Also, I have mystery telegraphed. I think it's kind of obvious who's behind what once the story gets rolling, but I figured it out immediately. And that's if you're looking to have a mystery in this movie, it's spoiled pretty quickly. I'm not going to say when or where it got spoiled for me or how I figured out things, but I can't tell if the movie wants this to be kind of a mystery whodunit or it just wants to be an obvious, straightforward thing from what we see early on in the film. But there's no mystery here. We know who's behind what. We understand the motive. It's very simple and basic. And I think that took a bit away from it. I don't think the overall, like the confessionals and kind of the confrontation at the end and the whole big climax that is going to end this big popular trilogy feels like it's paying off enough. I don't think in some parts that it built up to it. It started off building up nicely in the first third. The second third kind of loses some of the build up and you're just kind of following MaXXXine, which she's great, so it's fine, but I think they lost something in the second third of the movie leading into the end where it doesn't feel like it's building in the proper way for me, and it feels like the reveal and the reasoning is just very paint by numbers straightforward. So when you get the reveal of who and what and why, you're like, oh, yeah, I mean, what else would it be? Obviously. So it didn't feel like the stakes were as big as the location and the moment would have led us to believe. And that is also my last note here is the stakes are lacking. Again, while the casting and the set feels bigger, everything else kind of feels a bit smaller, and it feels like this movie feels like a fish out of water. It is by no means a bad movie. Overall, I had a good time with this. And because I think 2024 is severely lacking in horror, this is the worst year for horror for me personally, as a fan with what I like and all the things I've gone to see and how I felt about them. It's the worst year in horror for me in over a decade by far. But I do think this movie is a good movie. It's just a different movie than I expected. And I think with having such high expectations, having X in the 7 to 7.5 out of 10 range, and then putting Pearl in the 9 out of 10 range and being nearly a perfect movie for me. I loved it so much that I came in with such high expectations that to be pulled into a whole different world and have the tone and the genre kind of shift on us, it felt like drop shock. I felt just like an initial shock that I never really got over in the movie. That being said, as both a standalone and as a sequel to the franchise, it's not a bad film. You do get a lot of MaXXXine, you get a lot of her progression as a character, you get flashbacks to the originals, you get good casting cameos, you get a pretty good linear story that progresses, obviously and kind of easily, but progresses well. And the movie's an hour and 40 minutes, and that's a good runtime for it. It doesn't feel like it overstays its welcome. It's paced okay, not special, but decent. And I think overall, you're going to have a good time. If you've loved X and or Pearl, you should go see this. It is a solid movie overall, and I think a decent end to this trilogy. I think Ty West did say that if this did well, he was going to make a fourth one, possibly because the first two went so well, and I think he has already started making the fourth movie. So whether or not he pushes that into production quickly or waits to see how the numbers do the next couple of weeks, I think we're going to be getting another one of these movies, which I would like. I don't think this lived up quite to my personal expectation. People were going to like it. I like it too, just not as much as I'd hoped to. So I'm going to give this movie a 6 out of 10. And by default, by proxy, because again, horror's been bad this year, I've got this as my number 3 movie of the year in the horror genre. I've got Late Night with the Devil was 1, Immaculate is 2, and this is my number 3 by default. By no means bad, better than average, worth watching, just fell a bit short for me because I came in with such lofty expectations after the first 2 movies. So 6 out of 10 for me. What did you guys think? Please tell me in the comments down below. Please like, share, and subscribe this video if you like these movie deep dives, and tell me what you thought of this film and what else you would like me to review in the future. Stay scared, my friends, and take care.